There's no, I think I'm good. Okay, well, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Katie Brantley and I work for the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District. And I'm joined here with some great speakers tonight from our local land trusts. We're to share some overview content about sustainable agricultural land conservation, specifically related to agricultural conservation easements. So to give you an idea of the flow of this evening, after just a brief introduction to our speakers, we'll get into the meat of the presentation, talking about why ag land conservation is important, going into locally grown products, local businesses, keeping land in production and perpetuity, family succession, and land development changes as some examples. And then we'll switch over to our intro about the conservation easement specifically, how they work and how the finances come into play, and then different, let's see, sorry, I can't even see my slide, about the different rights retained versus restricted, what you might expect with a conservation easement, and then some frequently asked questions that come along with this whole process. And then we'll open the floor to y'all's questions at that point. But please feel free to start putting your questions in the chat as you think of them throughout the presentations. Want to just let you all know that this meeting is being recorded, and we're wanting to be able to share it for your review. And for those who can't make it with us tonight, it'll be available on the website that where you signed up for this, on the RCD's website. So just a good reminder for Zoom etiquette, please do stay muted during the presentation, and then as you have questions, then we'll be able to get you off mute to ask those. So just a brief introduction on who we all are. We're part of a county-wide Mendocino Sustainable Ag Lands Committee with the goals of conserving agricultural and natural resource lands, while at the same time encouraging responsible and balanced development. And this pretty messy logo cloud going on at the bottom of the slide is a representation of all of the different parties involved in this effort, the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation effort. So really appreciate all of the hard work from all of these different partners. And we currently are funded under a Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation grant through the California Department of Conservation to, among other things, host webinars and workshops like this one. And if you've never heard of SALC, as we call it, it's part of the California Climate Investments, which is a statewide program that puts money, cap and trade dollars to work, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the economy, and improving public health and the environment. And they do have a focus on disadvantaged communities. So I'd like to give all of our presenters a chance to briefly introduce themselves and the organization they represent. So first, let's start with Barbara. Barbara Goodell, would you like to go first? Thanks.
Sure. I'll start with Anderson Valley Land Trust. It's our 30th anniversary year, and Anderson Valley Land Trust is dedicated to the preservation and restoration of our unique rural landscape with its abundant natural resources for the benefit of future generations. And we serve the Navarro River watershed area, plus the Anderson Valley community, which actually goes a little bit farther. And we currently steward 27 conservation easements, and that covers and protects 2,400 acres in Anderson Valley. And I've been a board member since its inception, and but before I retired, my profession was a teacher and curriculum writer. And I've lived in Anderson Valley for 43 years with my family, creating a homestead.
Thanks so much, Barbara. How about you, Alan?
Very good, Barbara. I'm Alan Nicholson. I am currently the president of the board of directors of the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust. We're based in Ukiah. We primarily focus our conservation efforts on the Russian River watershed. We have 9 members on the board and have 3 conservation easements in the Inland Mendocino area, and we're working on 3 more at the current time. We started in 1994, and I've been on the board since 1995. It's working with conservation easements is a slow, patient investigation of how best to protect lands for landowners and for the community. There's great benefits for the community. So that's a brief introduction to the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust.
All right, you're up, Larry.
All right. Hi, I'm Larry Turner. I work for the Mendocino Land Trust. Our offices are based over here in Fort Bragg, California, on the coast, but we work all over the county. The organization started in 1976 with a project that's near and dear to my heart, conserving land around the Big River watershed, where my family used to have a camp, family campsite out that way. So our entire family is thrilled to see that that's conserved at this point. We have over 7,000 acres of conserved land. We work in all sorts of types of environments. We have agricultural land trusts, as well as conservation easements on forested land. We also have a set of fee-owned properties, meaning we own the properties that have both public access and then restricted access throughout the county.
And Nikki?
Hi, I am Nicolette or Nikki Houts. I also work for the Mendocino Land Trust. I primarily work in stewardship. So like Larry said, we have 5 coastal preserves, but many miles of coastal trail. And we also have a forested preserve just west of Willits. And so we've been doing a number of forestry related fuel reduction projects there. He covered pretty much everything else.
Great, thanks to you all. Looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us tonight. And with that, I'll hand over the mic to Barbara to get us started.
All right. So why is ag land, agricultural land, important? And I just wanted to mention too, we're meeting this webinar as a conversation. So anyone else who would like, on the panel anyway, who would like to jump in and add to what I'm saying, please do. Preserving agricultural land encourages locally grown food, fiber, herbs, and beverages. And that's not just vegetables or fruits. That's eggs and meat and grain and oil and nuts and all the various things that are grown in Mendocino County. We also have a Mendocino fiber shed now. So there's fiber that's locally grown and herbs of all sorts. And beverages, wine, beer, apple juice, apple cider, kombucha, that's local. And with those locally grown ingredients, you get more nutrition, less packaging. It saves fossil fuel all around, and it's available even in a pandemic. And you don't have to drive over the hill or around the mountain to get it. It's local. So I think the most important thing is that you know who grew it, and that so you're certain of the growing practices. Next slide. Conservation easements also provide open space and less urban sprawl. And this is something that everybody loves, but which diminishes as cities grow. So conservation easements, especially agricultural ones, can really help that. Agricultural easements help the retention of rural agricultural heritage, which is a long one in Mendocino County, and we want to help preserve that. And as all of you know, it's important for local businesses and employment. So it provides agriculture does, farming, ranching. It implies that there's employment for the family and other workers. It keeps money in the county. It gives you farm stand opportunity within the zoning laws in Mendocino County. It provides for expansion of value-added products, not only just the produce that comes directly. And it provides stores with local products, which people are asking for more and more, including the farm stands like filigree. And it also increases the local economy because farms and ranches purchase a lot of supplies here. And keeping land in production in perpetuity is one aspect of conservation easements that's really important. And it has a lot of benefits to the county itself and to the community. And from that perspective, it helps provide local self-sufficiency. It permanently protects resources of agricultural land, ground and surface water, habitat, historic sites, and scenic views, and it permanently protects important farmland while keeping the land in private ownership and on the local tax rolls. The county likes that. And from the farmer's perspective, farming and ranching are a way of life, far more than a job. And after putting his or her whole life into the farm, he or she wants it to succeed. And what will your land look like in 10, 20, 30 years down the road? A conservation easement might allow you to retire comfortably on your own land. It could be a ticket to retirement. And it might be the biggest decision for farm and ranch landowners will ever make for their family and for the community. So it's up to you if you want to investigate a conservation easement to see if it might fit for your land. And Alan is going to take the next segment here on family succession, just a little intro to that. So you've devoted years of your life to the land. How will you pass your legacy on? These statistics are from 2013, but are still relevant, I think. 30% of the farmers and ranchers say they will never retire. 70% don't have wills. 75% don't have a successor in place. And the vast majority of farmers are in their 60s or older and work past retirement age. And even though it was, again, from 2013, in the next 10 years or so, 3/4 of the farm and ranch lands in the United States will have changed hands. And that really emphasizes the importance of saving some of those lands.
Thank you, Barbara. That was really good. So I would like to talk about family succession. This is a subject that is usually comes up very early in shaping and programming a conservation easement. It's always on the minds of landowners, whether to sell the property, whether to find a like-minded person to take over their the endeavors on their land, or whether family can do it, and whether family want to do it. So one of the first considerations is who's going to be the next owner and how to plan for the land in your estate. Many families wonder how to preserve land and may have stewarded the land for generations. Yet how do we allow freedom for future heirs, or retiring, or wanting to shape the future of your land and your community? As all of us who own larger properties know, it does have a very powerful effect on the community we live in. So these are important decisions. Landowners have found that conservation easements offer great flexibility, yet provide a permanent guarantee that the land will not be developed or subdivided. Land management is also family stewardship and longer-term planning. No matter how young or old a landholder is, or how new the property is, now is the time to begin, whether you're considering a conservation easement or not. There are many ways to conserve your land, and it should include family and stakeholders in your land to come up with a long-term management plan. In establishing a succession plan, think of it as a 100-year plan, because posterity is a very long time, and a conservation easement is a permanent easement that is registered with the Secretary of State and the county assessor's office. And it's a legal document that partners the land trust with the landowner. So when you sell the property, you divest yourself of the property, but the land trust still maintains management of that using your shared vision with the land trust. As you work on your management or succession plan, you'll learn a lot more about your property, about its history, its ecology, and the potential it has. It will help you define what you want your land to be and what is possible within the physical constraints of your site. It is important to put your management plan down on paper. That way you can share it with others, your family, your land trust, other professionals, and future generations. In some cases, a plan is mandatory. For example, if you want to apply for a cost share grant to acquire have the land trust acquire your easement, or to get a bank loan, or just to inform the next stewards of your land. You should start by prioritizing and identifying your goals and define your objectives. What you want, what you don't want, what is the best for the land, how will you conserve and maintain the assets and conservation values of the land. Working with the land trust will shape this partnership and turn the plan into a detailed description of the land and the habitat to be a guiding document for future stewards of the land. A plan guides activities for decades, providing continuity through successive generations and owners. So it's a long-term plan, and it takes much thought, and land trusts are familiar with helping landowners put conservation easements together. Later on in the program, we'll hear more about how that happens. Katie, if I could have the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about land development changes. Ag land and open space have traditionally been a family resource for extended sustainable asset management. Conservation easements are a responsible tool to preserve this. So in land use, looking at the bigger picture from our individual parcels and properties, there's many factors shaping our lives, and sprawl is one of them. Sprawl is reshaping the definition of housing from a social, a cultural, and sustainable family resource into an investment. Mortgage rates, interest rates, banking, real estate, investors, and developers affect the housing market and have deep impacts on land preservation. So there is a big train coming to the North Coast and Northern California, and we should all welcome it. This train is going to bring economic stability, but it's also going to bring pressure on us to preserve our land or develop it. So I hope all the listeners tonight will carefully weigh the importance of their land and the importance of the open space we have. Agriculture is a crucial component of the Mendocino County economy and its cultural heritage. California has lost an average of 50,000 acres of farmland each year for the past 30 years. Mendocino County contains less than 50,000 acres of productive farmland, and nearly 28,000 acres of those lands are identified as prime, unique, and statewide important soils. So the places that agriculture is typically bottomlands with better soils, better water resources. These are also the easy pickings for land developers and developing this land. Conservation easements are an important tool in preserving farmland and open space. Land trusts have stepped up nationally and locally to play an ever-increasing role in conserving natural lands and open spaces by purchasing land with public and private funds, or by providing significant tax benefits through donated easements. And this is a big appeal to landowners, is the significant money that can be saved and reused by putting your land into a conservation easement. How can we as a county plan for sustainable future farms, forests, and rangeland? The cities of Sonoma, Cloverdale, Sebastopol, Windsor have created urban growth boundaries. These are agricultural green belts that coexist with development. These towns have boomed as a result, but the next generation of farmer families have decisions to make. Seniors want to preserve their ag land. Their children may not want to be locked up into ag if there's profits to be made elsewhere. So urban growth boundaries make it a clear decision for developers and farmers that are safe. These are bigger considerations than we as individual landowners can do individually, but it's a political movement to find ways to protect open space. Sonoma County has done this, and through legislation and voter initiatives, we can confidently save large parcels and large segments of rangeland, forest land, and farmlands. So next is we're going to get into more details about how conservation easements work and how we establish them. So this is the manual on conservation easements. Larry, would you like to start off, or Nikki?
It's me this time, and thank you, Alan, for that. Thank you for all of that information about family succession, and Barbara, thank you for your thoughtful words about locally sustainable food. It's always important. Katie, if you could bring up the next slide for me. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about how conservation easements work. These are just some basics. These are not, it kind of scratches the surface. This is not by any means the, in-depth, every last thing that you need to know about a conservation easement, but hopefully it piques your interest. The first thing I have listed there is kind of the internet definition of a conservation easement. If you go out and search any of our websites, this is the voluntary legal agreement statement is something you'll find on the Land Trust Alliance, our website, Wikipedia. So that's kind of just the basic definition of a conservation easement. Basically what you're doing is you are taking your land and keeping it in perpetuity, which is a big, bold statement. And I know I've heard Barbara and Alan both mention it, that the conservation easement that you put on your property goes on forever. It is perpetual. But you are limiting the use to something restricted, and in this case, agricultural use, not development, not subdivision, but an agricultural use of the property. That would be its value. To get a conservation easement going, you work with a local land trust, such as the Anderson Valley Land Trust, or our friends at the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust, or with Mendocino Land Trust. That land trust will hold the conservation easement and will do some yearly monitoring. They'll come out and pay you a visit. The land trust likes to work with the landowner and making sure that the conservation values are continuing in perpetuity. And I always I don't know if you can see me, some of you I think can, I can see a few of you. The best way I can describe some of this is with this bundle of sticks example. And if you can see me, I'm holding a bunch of sticks, and actually in this case, it's just a bunch of fancy chopsticks, but it does work for the example. So when you hold the property, you are holding the bundle of sticks. You hold all of the sticks, and there are thousands of them. You have many thousands of sticks. And if the power company wants to put a power line over your property, they're going to ask you for permission, and they're going to ask for an easement. And you're going to take one of those sticks, and this is the power company's access, and you're going to let them hold half of it, and you're going to hold half of it. But you've given away the ability for them to do that. When you have a mortgage on your property, you are working with a bank. So take out another stick and handhold that with them, with the bank. If somebody, a neighbor, needs access on a road that may have been existing when you purchased your property, somebody accesses your property, their own property through your property, they likely have a road easement. So there's yet another stick. So the property owner is holding these sticks with other people, although the property owner is the one that holds all of the sticks in the end. So that's kind of the best way to think of it. Your conservation easement is one more stick that you're holding with your land trust, and they're there to help you with that. If you've got questions about the sticks, we can talk about those, at the end of this. Again, conservation easements are perpetual. They go on forever. And I've had a lot of people challenge me. They're like, what do you mean forever? Our government's not been around forever. And it's as forever as we can get within the legal system that we have working with us now. So Katie, can you go on to the next slide for me, please? There's some financial matters to deal with conservation easements. We always advise that you speak to your own folks on your side, somebody that represents you, your own tax advisor, your own attorney, your own financial planner, because there are potentially property tax benefits for you by putting a conservation easement on your property. You may see a reduction in property taxes. If you donate your conservation easement to an organization, you might be eligible for tax credits. And I'm hesitating in saying you will or will not, because it depends on your own financial situation. because you're the property owner. And I wrote it in there again. Did I mention to check with your own tax advisor? And I feel like that needs to be in the signature line of my email every time. You should always check with your own attorney. You should always check with your own folks and make sure that you're covering your own bases on some of this stuff. There is potential income from selling your conservation easement. It requires finding a funder, generally a grant of some sort, that would buy the conservation easement and then donate it or give it to the organization that's holding it. It requires some due diligence and some work. It takes a long time to do that. Somebody's got to find the grant. You need to help write the grant. And then you frequently have a waiting period. The grants are submitted, they're reviewed, and you may or may not get it the first go around and have to do some refining. So if you have patience, it's a great way to do it, but it may take longer than just going it yourself. The easement gets written by your local land trust. It gets drafted. It's reviewed by both you and attorneys. And the land trust will work with you to have your vision on the property and make sure that your vision is maintained. Nikki, in a couple of minutes, will talk about retained and prohibited rights. And the land trust will work with you on making sure that those rights work for you going forward in your easement, since this is going to go on forever. Nikki, I think you're up next. And Katie, we can go.
Okay, so we just kind of wanted to give you a sense of what it might look like if you had a conservation easement. So all conservation easement documents contain a section that describes the reserved rights and restricted uses on the property. And so like Larry said, it's a voluntary legal agreement. We always work with landowners to craft a conservation easement that reflects their vision for the land while still protecting the conservation values. So what you're looking at here are examples. This is not, this is not definitely going to be in any single conservation easement, but we wanted to kind of give you a sense of what could be there. So all conservation easements provide public benefits. And so some of these public benefits are things like water quality, agricultural land, scenic views, wildlife habitat, or historic preservation. And most conservation easements contain multiple public benefits. So for agricultural conservation easements that the Mendocino Land Trust holds, a number of them are cattle ranches. They grow their own food, but they also protect oak woodlands or, streams. There's often like a riparian buffer to protect a stream. So while every easement is unique, there are a few common things you'll see. And again, these are examples, but one of the most common ones is that development is almost always limited in some way. So one of the things that we often work with landowners on is a building envelope. And so we discuss, the plans for the future, what you may want to build, maybe a barn, farm worker housing, and where that could go. And then we work out a building envelope. So if it's important to you to build a home on your land or to subdivide your property, you may be able to reserve those rights as long as you're still protecting important conservation values, such as productive farmland. So again, the restrictions really just depend on what you're trying to protect, and you work with your land trust to decide on terms that are right for you and for the land. The other thing that wasn't mentioned much, but just to be clear, an easement doesn't have to cover everything that you own. It could protect your whole property or part of it. So just a note. Next slide, Katie. Okay, so the role of a land trust. So once, what to expect. Once the conservation easement is established, it is our job as a land trust and the holder of the conservation easement to make sure the promise to protect the land is kept And we do this by ensuring the terms of the easement are upheld. This means making sure the restrictions described in the conservation easement are carried out. And like we've said so many times, we take on this role in perpetuity, so it's truly no small task. If we were to not exist any longer as a land trust, the conservation easement would still go with the land and someone else would take on this responsibility. So how do we do this? Well, at the same time that the conservation easement is being hammered out, all the details, you're working with the land trust on that, we also produce another document that goes along with that, and it's what we call a baseline documentation report. And so what this does is it describes the condition of the property as close to the time of closing on the conservation easement as possible. And it'll document any structures, the physical features, the natural features, the conservation values of the property. And when everything is said and done and the easement is complete, we use this baseline documentation report when we come to do our annual monitoring visit. So it's a snapshot of a moment in time. And when we come out year after year after year, we can see the changes by comparing it to this baseline report. So part of a conservation easement is that a staff person from a land trust will visit, a monitoring visit, once a year. The Land Trust Alliance standards are that we visit once a year. So we'll reach out, we'll set up a time, we'll talk about what's happened over the last year, and then typically we just walk the property together. The monitor will often take a lot of photographs and maybe some GPS points, and all of these go into writing a monitoring report, which we keep on file and we send to the landowner. And so usually they're really pleasant, nice visits, a great way to stay in contact and catch up every year. Some land trusts are also able to help landowners with certain stewardship activities. Maybe if they're looking for money to help them with roads or to do some stream restoration, it's possible that we might be able to provide you with some assistance or show you where you might look for help with these things. If a violation should occur, the land trust needs to make sure that these issues are resolved. So in most cases, the land trust works with the landowner on a voluntary resolution. We've not really had many serious violations, but they have happened with other land trusts. So that's generally it. You'll hear from us once a year, and that's about all, and we'll have a nice visit. So next slide, Katie. So this just recaps a few frequently asked questions, Larry.
So yeah, do you have to let people onto your land if you have a conservation easement on it? Are there going to be hiking trails across my land? No, you don't have to allow public access on your land just because you have a conservation easement. A conservation easement is not a public access. It's not necessarily a public access agreement. And will the land trust tell me what I can grow or raise? No, they can't. As long as it's a federally legal crop, the land trust will not be telling you what you can grow. You do still own your land. Some say, oh, I have to give up ownership. It's no, you're not giving up ownership. You're giving up one of those sticks is what you're giving up. Just like the power company or that road access easement. Conservation easements are permanent. They are perpetual. I think all of us have said that a couple of times. So sorry to drill that one in right up there with the tax advisor and your own attorney. Yes, they are forever. They don't expire like, say, the Williamson Act. They don't have a 35-year limit on them and then just go away. These things go on forever. You can still sell your land and you can still leave the land to your heirs. So these are all things that folks frequently ask us about conservation easements. I do think that's starting to get us towards the end of the slides here. Yeah, we have one more, and I don't know, Katie, did you want to promote this or? There you are.
I'll jump in. Thanks so much to all of y'all. It was a great introduction. I'd just like to, before we open up the floor to questions, just like to remind everyone that we have another webinar same time on this Wednesday, where we can dive a lot deeper into your questions, into all of the any or all of the subject matter that was highlighted today. And we'll have a guest speaker with us to go into that deep dive, Tom Scharfenberger, who you might have heard about, or at least heard about his family. And so we're excited that he can bring his expertise and his wealth of knowledge and experience with land planning to our group. I'll just leave this slide on there for a bit so you can jot down some contacts if you're in any of these certain areas or want to target a specific land trust with some questions. But otherwise, I'd love to start asking some questions. I have not received any in the chat yet, so please feel free to put some in there. I do know that Anita has asked a question already to me via email, so I'd love to give you the opportunity to ask it to the group if you like. Otherwise, I'm happy to ask it.
Hi. I guess the first question seems to have been answered concerning do you need to have legal counsel to establish a conservation easement? And it seemed like Larry made it pretty clear that that's a very good thing to do, is to know your legal rights and what is specific to your property. So thank you, Larry, on that one. The other question pertained to if you establish a conservation easement, are there avenues for any amendments later on down the line? Or is what is established at the get-go and finalized, that's it? That's all you get? Those were my two questions.
I'm off mute, so I'll take the first stab at it. How about that? I'm just looking around the room here. So it's kind of one of those can you or should you on your second question there. So when you establish the conservation easement, it can be a long process, and it can be, it involves lawyers and a lot of people and expense. You can ask for an easement modification, but it can get to be expensive, and you need to have a reason. So it would be, I'm trying to think of a really good reason to modify the conservation easement, because they are perpetual. They go on forever. If suddenly you wanted to take half of it out of being in the conservation easement, I would say no, they probably wouldn't let you do that. If you want to do something like move your building envelope, you might work with your local land trust and see how it's going to affect the value of your property. So there's a lot of, maybes to add to that. What kind of amendment were you thinking of in the conservation easement? Was there something in mind?
I was not thinking of anything in particular. I just was thinking in general, are these things amendable? That's as far as I was thinking.
In general, it's not one of those things you do very frequently.
And I would just like to add that you can make it more strict. You can add conservation values to it, or trade. If you want to do something that is equal, then perhaps you can work with the land trust to do that. But you can make it more strong, but not less.
Okay.
I could add a little bit. A conservation easement is a legal agreement, and there are legal precedents for amending conservation easements. We are in the process of amending a conservation easement right now, and easement we've held for a number of years. The principle involved is that a conservation easement is for the public benefit. It maintains the conservation values in perpetuity. So this is considered a public benefit. It keeps the space open. It keeps it in its natural state, or whatever state it was when the conservation easement was written. So if a person wants to amend their conservation easement, it has to be for a greater public good. So it cannot be for a personal gain. It has to be a gain for the public. And this is kind of a guiding principle of conservation easements in general. They can be done. It is a lot of work. The reason one of our conservation easements is being amended is it's kind of complicated, but there was another landowner, big landowner, not adjacent to this parcel at all, but quite removed. Well, it turned out their original survey was faulty, and it ricocheted down this whole hillside of many miles and affected people's property lines. So our conservation easement was based on a property line that was subsequently not, it was moved. And so we're modifying, we're amending the conservation easement to work with those landowners to redefine it.
Great, thanks for sharing that specific example. I think that's helpful.
May I add something to that, please? The Land
Please
Trust
do.
Alliance has 7 or 8 different criteria to use in evaluating proposals to change a conservation easement. And some of those have already been mentioned, like it serves the public benefit. I think Barbara hit it on the nail head. The most important criteria, does it have a net beneficial or neutral effect on the relevant conservation values of the property? And you're not supposed to amend an easement just to let the landowner make more money. I mean, there's a private enrichment clause. So the ability of a land trust to modify an easement is there, but it is bound by, in essence, common sense. You know, is the easement going to be equally as strong and as valuable as possible? We had one recently modified conservation easement where instead of having 2 building envelopes, we allowed the property owner to say, let's do the same development in one building. If they wanted to do all the development in one building envelope, they would give up the other building envelope, which in its face is less habitat fragmentation, less impact on water and sewer resources, et cetera. It's really a clustered development versus sparse development. And that we said, okay, we should amend that easement because that change would allow for a net benefit to the conservation values.
Good.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
Just gonna make sure you know Patrick's is with Anderson Valley Land Trust.
Yes.
And
Well, I was
sorry,
going to add a little side note on whether to have a client attorney involved. We have one conservation easement that the owners didn't want an attorney. They just wanted to use the land trust attorney. And it has turned into a very secure, I think, well-planned conservation easement. But it's like when an owner wants to build their own house, it tends to be a little bit, you know, there's a lot of micromanagement, and unnecessary details that go into it. And it could be a liability in the future, since these things go forever, trying to monitor and uphold the conservation details. That's all I wanted to say, that it's always better to have a professional work with you, and the land trust has a professional working with them. And it makes a much better, more easily managed package in the long run.
Thanks, Alan. And we do have a couple other questions that we can ask, but I would like to just note there's a comment in the chat from Michael Delbar. He's joined us from California Rangeland Trust. Just wanted to let you know that there are other options too beyond these 3 land trusts to help you with your any questions that you have. He's included his contact in there, so you could also reach out to Michael if you have other questions.
Great, very good. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, John, if you're up for asking your question to the group, I'd be happy to have you do that yourself.
Sure, Katie. I'm John Swartley, and I'm on the Mendocino Land Trust Board. In one question, quick question, two actually. One, do land trusts encourage or can they mandate best agricultural practices in terms of sustainability? I know that's a big issue in agriculture these days, in saving water and carbon and all of that. Does that ever enter into the negotiations on agricultural conservation easements?
I could address a little bit of this. That's a really good question. I would say that it's really the owner that sets up the conditions of their conservation easement, of their allowed rights and prescriptive rights. One of the key elements in evaluating the feasibility of maintaining a conservation easement is the ability of the land trust to maintain those initial conditions. And I would say all the conservation easements we have, which are only a few, the landowners are very concerned with sustainability, with the best practices for farming or managing forests. And a lot of the best practices that we have today may not be the best practices in another 50 or 100 years.
Right.
So it's a constant kind of concern for both the land trust and the owner to word their design program, their conservation program, so that it can be managed in a future that none of us can foresee.
I just saw a conservation easement come across my desk this afternoon that specified that that sustainable practices as defined by the UC cooperative extension, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah. Because the UC cooperative extension is generally accepted. I mean, it is banking on that they will be there in perpetuity with you. So you might want to designate a secondary organization or something in there, but it is up to the property owner.
And we generally don't get into the nitty-gritty of how you go about the agricultural practices on your land, but one of the things that may be written into an easement is that if you plan to graze, then we'll ask for a grazing management plan, and we'll have a professional, because I'm not a professional rangeland scientist, review it and okay it. The same with working forest lands or conservation easements that we have on working forests. We have a forest management plan. We have foresters review that.
And John, you had a follow-up, or did we?
I did have
kinda
one
talk-
other question.
Mhm.
Climate change will likely have a significant impact on agricultural land over time. Potentially could it make certain uses or properties uneconomical, and agriculture may become unfeasible on that land over a long period of time. In that case, what happens to the easement? Is it simply the land is left as conserved open space? Is that the, I'm not sure that's ever happened, but I wonder if that's the case.
I think that the Land Trust Alliance has been very open about saying that because there's climate change and because there are a lot of changes, that agricultural easements, all easements, need to give a broad swath to the practices so that it can change over time. And it's too much to get into with this particular one, but there are agricultural easements that say that the land has to be farmed, and the land trust is responsible then if one owner sells to another person that it still has to be farmed. And that is a huge responsibility. Anderson Valley Land Trust has not taken that on, and I don't think Mendocino Land Trust or Inland Land Trust has either. But in that case, your question is even more important. But I think that if you can't farm then in any way, then obviously you can't continue. But I don't know how that works into the legality part.
It's a great question. Now I'm wanting to go out and look at the Land Trust Alliance standards and see what they say. So that's a great question, John.
Maybe that's something we can prepare an answer for a bit more for Wednesday.
Yeah.
Anyone else have some questions they'd like to throw out?
I had a comment about something that hasn't gotten mentioned that might be important, and that's a stewardship donation. When someone donates an easement, or I think if it's purchased also, there needs to be a contribution to the stewardship fund of the land trust, because the land trust is responsible forever and a day for the for monitoring it and making sure that all the tenants are followed. And so basically we have to ask for an amount of money that will cover that, and it goes into a fund which is pooled in case the easement is challenged. And I'm sure it depends on the land trust how much that is.
So we have had another question come in from Dan and Deb, who I've unmuted.
Have you seen any examples of an easement for oak woodlands or riparian corridors?
Yes, we have. I'm certain other folks have as well. Actually, we just are working on that easement I mentioned. Actually has oak woodlands on it and agricultural land on it and a riparian area on it, over 1,400 acres in Potter Valley. So yes, there are examples of that in our area, because the area is diverse. There are, as Alan was mentioning, you may have in your single set of parcels low-lying agricultural land and then hills that are oak woodland and then perhaps a creek that runs all the way through it. So you might have everything on there.
Is there a limit?
Go ahead.
Is there a minimum or a parcel size?
Technically, no, but it's you'd be spending an awful lot of money and time to conserve half an acre. So most of them, start in the 50-acre size, but that's not a hard and fast rule.
Okay.
And going back to what Larry was saying about having different environments on an individual piece of land in that baseline study that we do at the beginning, there, we also draw maps of the property, and typically, at least Anderson Valley Land Trust will have one area for the oak woodlands. There would be one set of restrictions that could apply, and the riparian would have different restrictions, and then maybe another portion for the residential section, which would not have any restrictions. So there could be 2, 3, 4, 5 zones on any given piece of land with different restrictions.
Yes, the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust has, I think every conservation easement we have has, we tend to think of them as zones within a particular property, which may include many parcels. So there are forest zones with, say, conifers or redwoods. There may be rangeland with mixed woodland, oak savannas, farmland, creeks, and riparian corridors. And these all are treated slightly differently. So there, Nikki mentioned that one of the first things that happens after the conservation easement is kind of organized, and before it is signed by both parties, there's a baseline monitoring phase where the land trust goes out with perhaps professionals or just among themselves, depending on the property, to define these different areas. So all these different zones or parts of the conservation easement are recorded and photographed and described so that they can be managed over the years, and they will change. They'll forest land will evolve, rangeland could evolve, riparian corridors with water can change fairly rapidly, and so it's the job of the owner and the land trust to come up with ways to maximize the conservation values of the different parts of their property, and to find solutions for managing those, and in terms of global warming and the new world in the next 100 years, we may all be living in a desert. I don't know. So these are good questions people have brought up, and maybe we have to do quite a bit of changes in our descriptions of conservation easements. If there are no more creeks, if there are no more ag uses on parcels, could be an interesting century.
I'd like to go back to the question of minimum size that was asked. I'm sure other land trusts would say the same. Every easement is unique. As Barbara mentioned, Anderson Valley Land Trust has 27 easements. No two are alike. The smallest in terms of acreage easement we have is 10 acres, but it's 10 acres where the owner gave up all development rights, and it's immediately adjacent to Highway 128. So it's essentially a scenic easement, very easy to monitor. You can see it. It's just a grassy hillside with some oak woodlands associated with it. So there is a situation where because of the conservation values, which were scenic in this case, and the owner giving up one of his bundles of sticks, his ability to develop that property as a housing for a house, because it is zoned that way, he would be allowed to do it. It was an easy easement to accept. So, and the smallest, we haven't gone there yet, but we've been asked to consider a program to put an easement around old trees, not old growth, but heritage redwoods in Anderson Valley, because that is part of the character of Anderson Valley. So we're looking at how that could feasibly be done in a realistic way, because there are some huge redwood trees that are not necessarily virgin redwoods. We don't want to go there in the definition, but the owners really don't want those trees to be taken out. So that would be a minimal, sort of like a spot easement on a property, not the whole property. Again, it's a program we're evaluating.
Thanks, everyone. Any more questions? I'm not seeing any at the moment. Anyone else have something they'd like to share? Keep in mind, you can ask more questions on Wednesday if you come up with some and want to join us again.
I'd like to go back to something Larry said earlier about the economic, I think it was Larry who said it, the economic benefits. And he mentioned lower property taxes. And in our experience, none of our easements have applied to Mendocino County to lower their property tax. Where the benefits come in is in taking a tax deduction on your federal income tax, which is spread out over a 15-year period based on the value of the sticks that you're giving up. So if you're giving up subdivision rights, or if you have 4 parcels that could be built and you treat them as 1 parcel and you say it's just 1 parcel, that's an economic right that you're giving up, one of those sticks. So there are federal income tax, potentially federal income tax benefits. But again, talk to your attorney. You have to get your own appraiser. The land trust has nothing to do with that appraisal other than to say we are a federally recognized 501(c) and we can accept a donated easement. Is that correct, Larry?
Just make sure you talk to your own advisor. That's yes. What my answer every time is, have you talked to your own tax person?
There you go.
Yeah, this is a good subject. I think we were going to get into this on the follow-up Wednesday night talk. Locally, I don't think that we have any conservation easements registered for deduction in property taxes, but this is something that the county does do, and maybe as land trusts, we should be nudging people to explore this with the county assessor. There was recently, about a month ago, a very good webinar by the Farm Bureau on the Williamson Act, and they had Katrina Bartlemay, who's the county assessor for Mendocino County, on, and I asked her about what was the policy for the county assessor's office with conservation easements. They have a very well-established process for evaluating Williamson Act for property tax deductions. And she said, yes, we're required by law to do this, and there's no fixed amount that can be, it's not like a percentage. I think in the early years of the Williamson Act, they were giving people a 50% discount in their property taxes. And she said that has evolved to be so that every conservation easement or every Williamson Act parcel was individually evaluated with a set of criteria that was evaluated, and finally a percentage could be arrived at, but that each property was different based on how much land was either in active animal culture or viticulture or whatever the reason for the Williamson Act, which is a certain value, and the conservation values of conservation easement are what this is why we have an assessor assess the property, is to establish the conservation values, and those are what the landowner can take to their accountant for federal and state deductions in their taxes, and it's essentially based on how much they're giving up, how much potential. So if it's 100 acres of land zoned for development, and they give up that development, that's a very significant amount of that they're putting into a conservation value, and it would be susceptible to a large, as the county assessor put it, substantial tax break for their county taxes. So that is a really good subject, is the tax benefits of conservation easements, and I hope we explore that more on Wednesday night.
Yeah, maybe something for Wednesday night, because it is more technical. We'll lose people, but if you have your property reassessed for property taxes, some people have had their land for 10, 15, 100 years. And if you have it reassessed, the property value is going to be much higher now than it was all along with your deductions. So there is some, it might work, but on some pieces, I think people would have to be careful.
Yeah, good
I'm
point.
going to quote our business manager. She says, every conservation easement is its own special snowflake. So every single one of them is going to have its own set of circumstances.
Yes, well said.
Well, I'm glad we already have some teasers for Wednesday. But anything else anyone wants to bring up this evening before we close out?
I guess I had one little thing, and that, well, I don't know how little it is, but Alan was talking about inheriting, the children inheriting the farm or the ranch. And sometimes people don't have someone to, heirs or anyone who's been working on the land to receive it. And there are techniques for finding people to do that too. If you, the Farm Link, and there's other organizations that can help with that. But if family succession may not be an issue for some people if they don't have successors.
All right, with that, I think we can close out for today. Just really glad to have had so many people participating and interested in this topic. And we do hope that you join us at the same time on Wednesday, same Zoom link too. So it should be easy.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everyone who came.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.